Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of Hail to the Deadites. I have here with me the writer and director of the groovalicious newest entry into the Evil Dead franchise, Evil Dead Rise, Lee Cronin. Hi, Lee. How
Hello
you
there.
doing?
Hey, Groovalicious. What a line. I love that.
Dude,
I'm
this
doing good, thank you.
glad to hear it. Dude, this movie I have been so excited to see since the moment. I remember the tweet that you posted of you, I believe, at the Mystic Museum with the
Yeah.
little
Hand
Evil
grabbing
Dead
my
1
throat.
poster,
Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, "Oh my god," I instantly followed, I was so excited, could not wait, been following every nugget of news I could leading up to the release, and also, like, thank you, Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema, for releasing this in theaters the way it's meant to be seen because, oh my god, this movie is going to rock people's worlds, man. You did a phenomenal job with this.
Very kind. Thank you
You
so much.
exceeded my expectations.
Oh, that's really, really nice to hear, man. Yeah, we put the pedal to the metal, and I think when you make an Evil Dead movie, you've got to, you can't leave anything on the pitch, and that was kind of my attitude in making it. It's like really given the opportunity, you've got to like go for it big time. Um,
Yeah.
and so far people seem to be responding to the movie in those terms, and and having a fun time. I think that's thing. It's a super scary movie, but I wanted it to be an entertaining roller coaster. I thought that was really important, and probably has, even though tonally it's still different, probably has the strongest links with something like Evil Dead 2, where it just goes and goes and goes and
Yeah.
goes. But yeah, it's exciting that I said, fans like you and other fans are vibing with what I tried to create.
Right on, and I totally agree with that, and it's interesting that you mentioned the tone because one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, how did you decide on what to make the tone for this movie? Because you have different pockets of the Evil Dead fandom where they view the franchise differently. You have people who look at Evil Dead as strictly horror. You have people that look at it as more comedic, and then you have
Mhm.
people that look at it as a marriage between the two. And me personally, I feel like this film, as a viewer and as a fan, it kind of fits the vibe of Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2 because I've noticed a lot of reviews where some people are saying it's completely serious, but I've also seen other people say
Yeah,
it's hilarious. And
yeah,
so I was curious, how did you decide to strike that perfect balance and tone?
yeah. It's actually interesting just taking one of the things you said there about people actually viewing it in different ways, because people that view it as super serious, I kind of agree with less. I never tried to create the movie that way. I think some of that is followed through from the trailer, which is quite dark and scary. But I
Yeah.
remember thinking when we did the world premiere at South by Southwest, I was so happy to hear rolls of laughter in the theater, like, and again, we did the European premiere here in Dublin last night, and again, like laughter at those kind of moments. And like the tone was very simple for me, was make it dark, scary, entertaining, and then bring the levity in. And some of that levity comes through the over the top nature of the kills and the
Mhm.
action, the scary kind of action and the horror. And then also I wanted there to be these kind of like one-liners. I wanted there to be these kind of like, no one's ever going to top groovy, you know what I mean? Or
Right, fair.
like, or hail to the king, baby. Like you're never going to go there. But I wanted
Yeah.
my versions, like my take on those type of things. And that's really, when you're writing, that's where the tonal balance starts to come in. You look at these ideas, and like there's some lines and things that didn't make it, that went too far, like there was
Hmm.
things that went too far that had to get pulled out of the film and get pulled out in the edit. And in a way, I knew I'd kind of given myself some parameters for the darkness versus humor. And then I just tried to calibrate that in post production, really, and just try, because I always think with movie making, man, like I think tone is the most important thing. I'll watch a bad movie,
Agreed.
but if it does what it says on the tin, I'm pretty happy. Do you know what I mean? Like I
I
will
know
watch
exactly what you
I'll
mean.
watch a full on 3-star, you know, like uninspired film, but if it's saying, "Hey, this is going to be about this," and I get that, and the tone is right, like that's a 5-star movie. You know what I mean? Like I'm all about tone. It's so
I
important.
I totally get what you mean because sometimes, unfortunately, you have moments where a movie comes out, and depending on the way it's marketed, whether it's video marketing or print marketing, they may make it seem like it's one thing, and then you see
Yeah,
the movie and you're like, "This is nothing like what I was
yeah,
expecting."
yeah,
And again, not to sound like a broken record, no pun intended, but what I love is that this film not only meets expectations, but exceeds them in terms of like whether you're an Evil Dead fan, you know what to expect out of Evil Dead from
Yeah,
like past iterations,
yeah,
and you go there, man, and you go above and beyond. Or if you're just a general audience member, like I feel like this movie hits the sweet spot of being perfect for casual fans, hardcore fans, and general audiences.
hmm
And I was actually wanting to ask you, what inspired you to get into the art of filmmaking and cinema?
yeah.
And to piggyback off of that question, how did you go from The Hole in the Ground, which is an amazing movie, by the way?
Thank
I
you.
watched it immediately after the announcement of you getting Evil Dead. I looked you up and I
Mhm.
saw The Hole in the Ground and I watched and I was like, oh, we're good. I was like, I watched him. I was like, there's nothing no one needs to worry about. Like, watch this movie and you will see like this dude is gonna do perfect with Evil Dead. And then I was also curious, and I'm sorry if I'm asking too many like
It's all good.
questions
I
in
might
one
get
little
you to
go.
review I might get you to just give me the summary of the questions again, so I can give you. But yeah, no, I keep going, keep going.
Okay. The final part of that three-part question was, did you get the job for Evil Dead before or after you worked with Sam on 50
Ah,
States of Fright?
And I love that question because the assumption, we'll start with that part first. The
Okay.
assumption is that 50 States of Fright led to Evil Dead, but no, it didn't at all. We'd already
Okay.
done a deal and I was already working on Evil Dead before we
Nice.
made 50 States of Fright. And so it was actually right after the Hole in the Ground premiere at Sundance. I met with Sam. He'd seen the movie at a press screening in LA and he asked to meet me. And of course, Sam's on my Mount Rushmore of filmmakers. So, I wanted to meet with him and we talked about everything but Evil Dead at that point in time. And the whole time I was kind of itching, I was like rubbing my legs, going, when can I bring it up? Should I bring it up? And I was like, hey, what about Evil Dead? He goes, oh my God, we so badly want to do something new. But because The Hole in the Ground is tonally very different, he
Hmm.
didn't realize that I was a fan at all. Because The Hole in the Ground is like a little whisper at the back of your neck, and Evil Dead Rise is like a roar in your face. Like
Yes.
they're tonally very different. And that was February 2019. And we went through the process of I developed the story. We had multiple meetings. The guys then, as Hollywood goes, offered me a deal to write and direct the movie for them. That was in July of that year. And then Sam was making this show, 50 States, and I actually turned it down a couple of times because they had a bunch of different episodes and scripts.
Really?
And yeah, like because I like to direct what I write. I'm
Fair. Yeah.
like and it's the one and only time I've ever directed something I haven't written, although I did do
Okay.
some rewriting on it. But in the end, I was like, look, we're all friends here, and they brought me another script which I liked. And I was like, you know what? It could be really fun to go to Canada for a few weeks and shoot something. And I suppose that helped. It kind of helped understand the process of working with Sam, which is supportive and there when you need him, which is what's great. Great at him as a producer because he comes from a filmmaking background. He's not trying to crawl all over you or tell you what to do.
Right.
In fact, that goes for all the guys. Like they come from humble beginnings,
Yeah.
and so they've been pushed around in the
Hmm.
industry. They've survived, and therefore they actually try to not push you around. And
Which is great.
yeah, it's not something I've always experienced. Like I used to work in advertising and make TV commercials, and it wasn't for me. And one of
Mm.
the things that used to drive me crazy was you work and pitch and you win a job. And the moment you win the job, having jumped through all the hoops, the agency immediately don't trust you. And you're like, well, why did you hire me? But to be
Yeah.
fair to the guys, they were kind of the opposite in the sense that once I jumped through the hoops and showed them what it is that I wanted to do, they were like, Sam said to me one day, he's like, take the Evil Dead car keys and bring it for a drive. And I was like, I will, and I'm going to make sure I crash into loads of stuff along the way because that's what you've got to do, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they were really supportive. Movie making is not easy. You have your ups and downs,
Hmm.
you have your disagreements. Nothing is straightforward, but they backed the vision for the movie. They backed the approach for the movie, and that never really wavered. And I remember when it came to picture locking the film, I mean, like we're done, and ultimately, yeah, there was differences of opinions about certain things, but the guys were like, ultimately, Lee, we're gonna give you the conch and you make the call because it is your movie.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful for that type of support. I have to say,
I love that because like you mentioned with what they've dealt with in the past, you do
Mhm.
hear a lot of horror stories about
Yeah,
that
yeah,
where, people make a film and it's their vision and their idea, and then there's too many cooks in the kitchen meddling with it, and then ultimately the final product it's barely recognizable compared to the vision that you
And
had.
and one of the hilarious things to add to that is anytime that happens, it never works out. So,
No.
excuse me. So
You're fine.
you'd be better just actually, even if you like, oh my god, this film is going to tank, at least let it be unique, rather than having a tank but also being a piece of shit. So it's like, yeah, if you hire someone, sure, if someone's really incompetent, fine, then it's
Yeah.
actually on, you producers and studio, because
Yeah,
you haven't done your due diligence. But if you've done your due diligence and got someone on board, back their vision.
I fully agree with that,
It's
man.
the way to do it.
More people need to take a note from
Hmm.
you guys and do that. Speaking of your vision, I wanna address something that in the fandom would be considered controversial, which is for this movie, it is yet again another entry that doesn't focus on Ash Williams. Me personally, as a massive hardcore fan of the Evil Dead franchise, I'm fine with that.
Hmm.
Like, because I agree with Bruce that the franchise is more about ordinary, everyday people
Yeah,
fighting for survival against
yeah,
the Deadites and not about Ash. And so I was just curious, how did it feel to work on a story that wasn't centered on Ash? I imagine it lifted a weight off your shoulders to not have to
yeah.
make an Ash-centered story. And what advice would you give to the hardcore fanboys out there who, with anybody's version of Evil Dead, where they're like, "Oh, I don't want to see it because it doesn't have Ash."
No, no, the no ash, no cash phrase, right?
I was
Yeah, yeah.
literally about to say that. Yes.
Look, I can't change people's minds. They can either get on board or not. And thankfully, with Evil Dead fans, one of the things that I love, and being one myself, is actually people want different experiences. It like there's actually quite a low level of toxicity in the Evil Dead fan base. Like it's quite minimal. Um, and I always find it funny where people get hyped and be like, "Oh my god, there's no Ash in your movie. Ash was in Evil Dead 2013." I'm like, Ash is like a silhouette at the end of the fucking credits. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's not
Yes.
pretend that he's in the movie.
Yeah.
And actually, Bruce is in this movie, and just I haven't shared this with anyone else. That might be Ash Williams. That could be Ash
It's
Williams, because let's
it's
remember, time can be traveled in an Evil Dead universe.
yes. It's funny you say that. And G, if you're listening, take your headphones off real quick. Because like we were having a pre-discussion about it, but before you popped in, because I was curious, like, are the $50 still on the table? Because
Ah,
I caught it immediately,
yeah.
immediately right because like his voice is so distinct, and like I also the line that you gave him, I thought was perfect. I thought that fit him
And I have video of him
perfectly.
recording that line as well here,
Oh
over here in Ireland. And also Bruce did some Foley work for us as well. So when the eyeballs sequence and there's like sucking on an eye going on,
yes,
part of that is Bruce eating an apple. He really wanted to do that.
really?
Yeah, it's him. I've got video of that as well. Him just like laying down on this apple, yeah, in a Foley session.
It's funny you said that because that's also one of the questions I wanted to hit, which was the use of like sound and sound design. Like it's a two-parter. One is I saw after the fact in another interview where someone mentioned that this movie is very loud, and like I was like, was that just me? Because when I saw it last night, I was like, I felt like I was there
Hmm.
being bombarded with everything that was going on. But in terms of Bruce doing sound work specifically, I know he's mentioned that he's kind of a nerd when it comes to
Yeah,
being involved with sound
yeah,
related things. And I know he brought like a recording of original sound effects
yeah,
to you to use for the movie. I was wondering
yeah,
if you could touch on that a little bit. That and like the overall sound in general
yeah.
for the film.
So if we go right back to the beginning, like sound is obviously so important, and
Yeah.
but I don't see it as something I do later. It's part of the writing process. So even in the screenplay, the first couple of lines in the screenplay, like the first bit of action description, is um is sound. It talks about what you see before we actually cut to picture, which ultimately ended up being the sound over the Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema logos. But that was on the page from the start, what I wanted it to be. So then I brought my sound designer in, and he was able to read the screenplay and also get a sense of how the movie, in my mind, sounded. And then Bruce, as you said, is a big sound nerd, so it was a real pleasure to get him involved. And again, just like the guys were, he wasn't like leering over me. He came to Ireland, got to hang out, and I'd invite him in maybe twice a week for a couple of hours into our sound sessions, and we'd play stuff and have conversations and share some ideas. And I said we went to Foley sessions, and he did some sound effects for me. Very supportive. And I can't remember whether he offered or we asked, but ended up with a hard drive of all the original analog recordings from the
Oh,
Evil
that's
Dead,
so awesome.
which is really cool. And they're in the movie. Some of them are buried and textural, and then some of them are very obvious. Like the
Mm.
film opens and closes with the sound of the original
The
Fly.
Fly, yeah,
Fly
I
is
caught
there,
that, yeah.
and kind of couldn't resist that.
I love that.
And even if you actually look at the trailer, we've got the original wind sound, which Bruce told me, like Sam woke up one night and couldn't sleep and heard this weird wind and went and recorded it back when they were like, they were like staying wherever they were staying. I don't know whether they were shooting the movie or they were somewhere else, or maybe they were in prep on the movie, staying in some old rickety place, as was their wont with lack of money at the time. And Sam grabbed the Nagra and was like, that wind sounds really creepy, and went and recorded it. So that's in the movie. You hear some of that down in the underground vault where the book is
When
found.
Danny found, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's it's kind of hard because there's a lot of Easter eggs in the film, and quite a few of those are audio based as well. But yeah, Bruce is a really smart guy when it comes to sound, and very supportive, and very experienced. So it was really nice to have him involved in that part of the process.
Love that. I also just want to say real quick, thank you for mentioning that story about when Sam recorded the wind, because my friends were giving me so much smack when they added Evil Dead content to Fortnite, and I was geeking out, going, "Oh my God, this is the sound in the cabin from the original movie." And I was like, and Sam like went out and like recorded it like that night, and that's how I got in the movie. And they were just making fun of me. And I'm like it's recorded history. Like I promise I'm
Who's
not that
who's
nerdy.
laughing now, huh?
Who's like nice. Real quick, I wanted to talk about the setting and the characters.
Mhm.
Um, I love the fact that you took it out of the cabin and into the apartment. And also, I just want to apologize if any of my questions end up being like the same questions you've answered
Oh, no, no, not at
50,000
all.
times
Not at
over.
all.
But I love how the apartment feels like the cabin.
Mhm,
And I love, without going too much into spoiler territory, I love that the door feels like the cellar door.
mhm.
And I was just curious, like, how did you come to the decision about the apartment, and in terms of the characters, making it a grounded emotional family drama?
Yeah, the character part was very important. Like that's what I hunted down before I even started to think about it being a scary movie. I had to find the people, the place, and the metaphor, and I knew that I wanted an audience to, because audience is so important to me, but I want that audience to like these people, because then when we put them through the grinder, for one, when we take them on that journey, and we screw with their lives and we mess everything up, I think it's all the more powerful when you get to like those people and you get to know those people.
Fully
So
agreed.
that was really, really important. And then I kind of I viewed the apartment, like I just tried to break it down in my head a little bit, like how it was in the other movies, which is like you are trapped in a cabin. In this case, you're trapped
Hmm.
in an apartment, and you hit on it exactly that. Like the front door is the cellar door, because I don't get to have a fruit cellar, although we do have a basement and a level below that basement. And then I saw the extension of the building in terms of the corridor, the elevator, the parking lot. That was like my forest to play in. Like
Yeah,
that's where I got to get out of the space and go somewhere else. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I viewed it. And I remember even like when I was writing early like outlines and treatments and just trying to calibrate the story, at one point I did utilize more floors in the building, and then remember kind of having discussions and thinking and being like, no, that's a zombie movie, that's not Evil Dead, right? Like,
mm,
Evil Dead is take a group of people, lock them somewhere, isolate them,
yeah,
and then psychologically torment them. Like that's what it needed to be. So yeah, I think the sense of place and character are like kind of key, like really, really key to this story. And I'm really glad that people love the people on screen and love that family, because I do too. I invested a lot of time and emotion, and actually I can see her there saying Stephanie's #1 fan. And so I have to give a shout out to my niece Georgia, who couldn't come in and watch the movie last night, because here in Ireland we don't have R rated, we've 18. So if something is 18, you can't
oh,
see it. So
wow.
she's like 14 and she couldn't come in and see the movie. But before I wrote Evil Dead, she gave me the idea for Stephanie, and she had the original Stephanie here last night. I rocked up to see my sister, rocked up to my sister's house, and little Georgia, she was probably like 9 years old at the time. and she loves horror movies, and she loves that I'm into that world. And she's like, "Look what I made." So the scene in the film where Beth talks to Cassie
Hmm.
and Cassie presents Stephanie to her, I had that exact conversation with my niece, and that's where it
Oh,
kind of
wow.
came from. So yeah, I got to give a little shout out to Georgia.
Love that. I think we are pretty much out of time. So to close it, I just wanted to say, what are you most proud of with this film?
Still being alive after it. um, I think look, it's not a pride thing. I'm just really happy that people are vibing with my intent. That's, as a
Mm,
filmmaker, that's the greatest joy, is you make something and people get it. And the
yeah.
fact that people are going, this is so familiar, but it's fresh. That's what I wanted to
Yes.
achieve. I wanted it to be fresh and accessible, but also comforting despite the horror. Because first and foremost, like, the prime thing for me was, I want to make the fans happy, because I'm one, and I want to be happy.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to create an opportunity for people to experience watching a movie like this for the first time in their life. People that haven't seen anything like this before, I wanted them to experience what I did when I was 9 years old and saw the movies for the first time. Um, so it's not pride exactly, but I'm relieved that that blend has worked and that people are, vibing off that. And that's the thing that makes me happiest.
I love that. And again, as a fan, you did a phenomenal job. Like
Thank you.
this, I know other fans are gonna look at me like I'm speaking of blasphemy, but this might be my favorite entry, my new favorite entry.
I'll
Like
take that, dude.
seriously,
That's made my
I
day.
loved it. You hit the nail on the head, or the head of the deadite with the chainsaw.
Well, look, thank you, and thanks for your
Yeah.
questions. And it was really nice to have this conversation.
Likewise, thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to chit chat. I hope you have a groovy rest of the day, buddy.
Thanks, dude. Take care. All the best.